Welcome to Lisbon and to this town hall. I am Micheline Dion, your president for the year, and I guess for a few more weeks. It is a pleasure to see so many of you in person again. I am accompanied today by President, like this. I know you know him very well, but let's see, by President-elect Charles Colling, and our immediate past president, Roseanne Harris, and our executive director, Mathieu Langelier. Today, we have a very busy agenda. Oh, okay. Somebody's taking care of the slides for me, that's great. We have 3 different topics. You have heard me talking about the water risk, but also talking about the need to work jointly with other professionals to learn from their expertise and complement our assessment of risk and opportunities. Today's first speaker is Lila Davis from the Environment Directorate of the OECD. She will talk about water risk from her OECD economist perspective. Her talk will be followed by Jill Hoffman, just over here. Jill is an EC member and chair of the Future Actuary Task Force. Jill will remind us that with new types of risk, we need to think of how to prepare ourselves and prepare the next generation of actuaries to be up to the challenge that we'll be facing. In the third segment of our meeting, Lisa Wade, also an EC member and chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, will review the progress made on diversity and inclusion and the efforts that still lie in front of us. Lisa will share the task force plans and to increase the diversity among the presence, beyond the presence of women. As you can see from the list I just said, we're doing well with women. We'll be 4 women talking to you today. But so it explained the fact that we need to expand with the larger horizons. The concept is broader as we need to open to a broad diversity of thoughts and experience. Welcoming diversity is a long process, much longer than one thinks at first. We all have bias that we're not even aware of. And we will close our town hall meeting with a few words from Chris Dakin. Chris, welcome with us. And Yves Guerra, which will join us by video conference, that will remind us that this year is our 25th anniversary as an association of association. They both remember the creation of the IAA as we know it today, back in 1998. So let's now start our program. So you will, as I said, you will first hear from Lila Davis. Lila is a policy analyst at the OECD Environment Directorate, working on water finance. She has formerly worked with the Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program. She has a background in policy research and economics, working in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Lila graduated from the London School of Economics and Political Science with an MSc in Environmental Economics and Climate Change. She holds a bachelor degree from the University of Birmingham in International Business Management. She is fluent in English, French, and Spanish. Congratulations. Amongst Lila and the OECD is so enthusiastic about the need to address water risk that she is even attending our water risk task force meetings. Welcome to you, Lila.
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. We're very happy to be here today and very pleased that you invited us. We're very interested in this work, the work of the IEA on the Water Risk Task Force. This is an emerging topic that we're seeing, and at the OECD we're interacting with lots of different financial institutions who are also recognizing the increasing increasing risks linked to water. And so we're really grateful for this invitation and to see how these different, how actuaries can also contribute to wider understanding of water-related risks. So let's see if this works. Okay, here we go. So maybe to start off, I wanted to provide a bit of context. So I'm sure you're familiar already with the OECD, but maybe as a little recap, we're an intergovernmental organization with 38 member countries, and we support member countries in formulating economic, social, and environmental policies through comparative data analysis and forecasting and research. So the reason I wanted to show this is because you are probably more familiar with the unit on private pensions and also the committee, the Insurance and Private Pension Committee. So the OECD has 300 different committees, expert groups, and working groups, and I fall under the Environmental Policy Committee, the Working Party on Biodiversity, Water and Ecosystems, and the Working Party on Finance for Environmental Goals. And similarly, I work in the Environment Directorate, which is one of 14 substantive directorates at the OECD, whereas maybe you're more used to working with the Directorate of Financial Affairs. So just to situate a little bit, because that also, I'm also approaching this topic from a little bit of a different angle because I am from the Environment Directorate, whereas maybe from the Directorate of Financial Affairs, it would be a little bit of a different approach. So just to situate a bit of context there. So if I could have maybe one click, thank you. And so I work at the in the Climate, Biodiversity and Water Division of the Environment Directorate, and we work on policy dialogues. So that's policy reform in countries, helping emerging economies in particular in addressing water challenges. We also work on water quality. We have another team working on adaptation, and we have a team working on water finance. And within water finance, we're looking at how to mobilize investment towards water-related infrastructure and also how to understand water-related risk so we can divert investment away from those activities. So I think a couple of key messages from what I wanted to present today and what I think you already know, which is why you've got this task force. So first of all, water-related risks are increasingly material. We are seeing this, various actors across the financial system are seeing this. So there's a financial impact and there are economic impacts. And the awareness of exposure and vulnerability to risk is insufficient. Often we're being caught by surprise by these risks and the scale of them. And quite logically, and I guess also where you may come into this as well, is we do need to improve the data, tools, and frameworks, risk management frameworks in particular, available to address water-related risks. Ooh, oh no. So I was going to ask you a question, but you've got the answer already. Pretend you didn't see that. So how many people lack access to safe drinking water? In case you, I'll go to the answer straight away. So it's 2 billion people. So currently there are 2 billion people who do not have access to safe drinking water. So what I want to do here is kind of give some information on what is water risk in practice. So first of all, we've got 2 billion people in the world who do not have access to safe drinking water, and another 3.6 billion who don't have access to safely managed sanitation. So these are people who are exposed to, who are even more susceptible to water risk as it happens, and to other risks across the economy. Let's try this again. All right, so what do you think was the value of combined economic losses from floods in 2021? Could anyone give a guess as to that number? Let's see if this works. Could I have one click? So in 2021 alone, flood events resulted in combined economic losses of 80 billion, of which only 20 billion were insured. And so At the moment, we've got 1.2 billion people who are exposed to flood risk, but this is going to increase to 1.6 billion by 2050. So flood risks are significant, and they're also increasing, and there's also a large protection gap. Can I have one click? Thank you. How much of the global population will be exposed to drought by 2050, if anyone has an idea, as a proportion? Pardon? Half. Half. Here I said half is bang on. So by 2050, over half the global population and nearly half of global grain production will be at risk from water stress. And currently, today already, we've got 2 to 3 billion people who experience water shortages for at least 1 month of the year. So there are, this is just to really highlight that water risk is already a big issue, and it is only going to increase over time. Okay, and so here are some examples of very direct socioeconomic impacts linked to water. I've circled here Pakistan in the beginning. You can see in 2022, from May to September, the floods affected 33 million people and caused $30 billion US in damage. In the US, you have there were persistent droughts in 2022, which also caused 22 billion in damage. So these are some very direct implications of this way. Here we go. Of water, of just drought and flooding. I would note there, whereas there are other risk drivers such as pollution and erosion of disruption of water systems. So that was a very narrow, even view of what the implications of water risk are. And here I wanted to show some global implications and maybe also indirect impacts of water-related risk. This is some recent news, which was quite unfortunate, but also timely for this presentation, was the Panama Canal, which sees about 5% of global maritime trade volumes, and it's now facing critically lowered levels of water due to insufficient rainfall in the Lake Gatun, and also the drought restrictions which have been imposed. And so this has an important implication on the economies that rely very heavily on the canal, notably Nicaragua, Ecuador, etc., where there's up to maybe 10 to 20% of their maritime trade is coming from this route. But this also has quite important implications across the globe, particularly as the canal passage is set to be reduced by half up until February. Oh, thank you. It's kind. It's a water risk. Thank you. And we've seen other such situations. I think some very notable examples were the flooding in Thailand in 2011, which caused disruption to global automotive supply chain, which had very notable impacts on big companies such as Toyota. We also saw more recently in Chinese Taipei droughts, which impacted on microchip production and had an impact on global giants such as Apple. So there are some very real, some quite important implications or indirect implications from water-related risks. Okay. So maybe going back one step, and this is the environment director perspective, of course. What are we talking about when we talk about water? So we have blue water and green water. Blue water is what we see as rivers, lakes, aquifers, also glaciers, so liquid apart from glaciers in solid form. But we also have green water, which is all the water which is in the atmosphere, in the soil, and in plants. So it's all this sort of intangible, all this water that we weren't paying attention to before. And why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because of more research around planetary boundaries, which are the 9 processes that regulate the stability and resilience of Earth systems. And fresh water is one of those planetary boundaries. And actually, with the inclusion of green water, was the 6th to be crossed, which means that we're no longer operating in a safe space when it comes to our water. And this is to highlight really the importance of green water, where we are seeing a change since pre-industrial levels. and really the importance of things like soil moisture in the way the planet works. And maybe quite a good example of that is in the Amazon rainforest. With deforestation and also climate change, we're seeing increasing reduction in soil moisture. And actually this has the potential to trigger tipping points where parts of the rainforest can become savanna-like terrain. And this is an important tipping point in terms of the way our planet works. And here's another example of green water. And I know this is maybe diverging a little bit, but I think it's quite an interesting and really important point of understanding what green water is and how it can actually have quite local impacts as well. Previously, we thought that the weather or rainfall was a global is global. So basically, we're not really understanding where precipitation is coming or evaporation, precipitation, how it works as a global system. But actually, there's more research which shows that actually these are closed systems with quite local implications. So here's a figure of evaporation sheds and precipitation sheds. Bear with me, it's a little bit unintuitive, but an evaporation shed can be seen as an evaporation sink, so where water is falling. And a precipitation shed is where is a precipitation source, so where evaporation is coming from. So the blue area essentially is where evaporation is coming, and it is then falling in the evaporation shed. And what you can see is there's this overlap and quite critical zones, such as the Amazon rainforest. And what this means is that deforestation, there's more evidence which suggests that deforestation in one particular location can actually have very direct implications on countries surrounding it. And so this is an emerging area of research, but it raises some important questions about interdependencies between countries as relating to green water, and questions such as who owns the rain, essentially, and how do we see water? Is it a local private good, or is it actually a global common good? So this is something the OECD is working on through the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, for which we're the secretariat, and it's trying to think about new ways or new economic ways of thinking about water by taking into these, or trying to take into consideration these different values. So now coming back to water-related risk. So we understand water-related risk to be too much, too little, and polluted water. Those are the three main categories we talk about quite a lot. I won't come back to too much and too little because those are quite obvious. They were in the first slides. We know about drought and flooding. But pollution is often a topic we don't talk about enough, and it is an important risk to water. Okay. So pollution in low-income countries is often linked to insufficient wastewater treatment and also agricultural runoff. But this is also an important issue in developed economies linked to, again, agriculture, but also chemicals which can't be treated or which are not currently being treated by our water treatment facilities. And pollution is an important issue because we don't have as much data. So it's somewhere where we do have data, but we don't have as much data on water quality. And this is linked to the information we have from water quality monitoring. And then the fourth driver of risk, can I go back one more? Thank you. Are disruption to freshwater systems. And what I mean here are disruption to water-related ecosystems and the ecosystem services they provide. So here the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment provides 4 different services, or explains this through 4 different services: provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and supporting services. So provisioning is like the provisioning of goods and products, and it's quite explicit, it's quite easy to understand. Groundwater and surface water are important parts of this, but there are also regulating services like ecosystems' ability to deal with pollution up to a certain level, which can contribute to disease control and also climate regulation. Cultural services linked to identity and religious practices or physical and psychological well-being. And also supporting services, and maybe of most interest to insurance, flood and storm protection. And so my main point here is that there are other risks which perhaps less well understood, but are still very important and can have, and when they're disrupted, can actually have quite notable economic and social impacts. Thank you. And so what are the drivers of these risks? Climate change is the most well-known or obvious one that we talk about. We know from IPCC reports that that climate change is increasing the frequency and scale of flooding and drought events, and this is quite well recognized. But it's also important to also acknowledge the importance of economic activity and how that contributes to water-related risk. So we have overexploitation of resources, pollution, land use change, which are all very important drivers of water-related risks. And you can also include invasive species, and these 5 drivers might be quite familiar to anyone who follows nature finance, because these are recognized as the 5 drivers of nature loss. And that's important because the way we look at water in the Environment Directorate is a pillar of both climate and nature. So it's not just a climate risk, it's also a nature risk. These risks are intrinsically linked and also mutually reinforcing. Climate change is exacerbating water risk, as we've just discussed, but also overexploitation of resources can exacerbate the impact of climate change. If water has been depleted from a groundwater source, then a drought will have more impacts. And then in turn, nature risks such as drying peatlands can also lead to increased emissions, therefore contributing to climate change. So these are very connected challenges. And it's important to see them as such and not just to see water as a climate risk on its own. So some of the work we've been doing at the OECD and the Environment Directorate, we've been looking at how these risks transmit to the financial system. So we've been looking at physical risks, but also transition risks and liability risks. So I'm sure you're familiar with these terms, so I won't go into too much detail. Liability risk is sometimes packed into those as a subset of physical risk and transition risk, or it can be a risk in itself. And it's basically talking about risk of litigation from often environmental groups against banks, against corporates. And then we move on to, and then economic impact. How do these risks translate into an impact on the economy through disruption of activities, disruption of value chains, raw material price volatility, adjustment or relocation of activities, and capital destruction. And this could be to individual firms, or it could be a macroeconomic effect. And then based on exposure and vulnerability, we can then look at the implications for the financial system and underwriting risk, which I'm sure you're very well aware of all of these risks. But this is something we're quite interested in, this link between the economic impact and the financial risk, and the conversation around exposure and vulnerability. And maybe to give you a case study which illustrates this, there was recently an HSBC report with the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership, which looked at it applied a stress scenario to companies within its portfolio. And so this came about because they were thinking about situations like what happened in Cape Town with the Day Zero, where there was a very real possibility of water being interrupted. And so here they looked at heavy industry companies in their portfolio in East Asia country where there was already water stress, and they applied a scenario of an interruption of a water supply for 3 months because the water was not for a climatic driver, but because the water was prioritized elsewhere. And this led to an understanding of notable impact on credit risk, deterioration of the average portfolio credit risk rating. Over 1/3 of the portfolio moved from investment grade to speculative, and the sample's risk-weighted asset increased by 20% in the year following the shock. So this was a really interesting study for us because it highlighted some actual real implications from water-related risk, but also HSBC noted that this risk wasn't currently foreseen in its risk management practices, and at sufficient scale, it could actually have implications for the financial stability of the bank. This is some data from Swiss Re, and it was looking at the increasing occurrence of high loss secondary perils, so in terms of their frequency, but also in terms of their scale. And in 2021, 2 secondary peril events caused 10 million each. This was the winter storm Uri in the US and also floods in Central and Western Europe. And this is, I think this is quite an important point because even the insurance sector, which from the rest of the financial system's perspective, we often think has all the answers. But the flood risk is not being, or water risk is not being understood it's not being understood, and we're often looking at previous risk to estimate future risk, whereas this is no longer the case. And on that, there's also a recent blog series which was released by the New York Federal Reserve looking at flood risk in the Fed's second district, which I think was published this month actually, and it looks at existing flood maps and discusses how many of them are actually out of date, or much of the data is currently out of date, and so the flood risk mapping is not aligning with where the actual risks lie. And this actually highlights what we know is that water risk is dynamic, and therefore static tools will not work to address it. But what was also interesting in this series of blogs is they looked at how corporates were using, how corporates were making decisions and whether they were taking flood risk into their decision-making process and where they locate their businesses. And actually, no, they weren't to a large extent, which means that those flood risk areas are going to play a significant part in the economy of the region for years to come. And a final study, and then I'll stop sharing studies with you. But this is from the Central Bank of the Netherlands, and they did a stress test on in the scenario of a major flood event. And this was quite interesting because they wanted to look at the implications for financial stability, and they found that at sufficient scale, So flood risk in some of the sparsely populated regions of the Netherlands, the banks were sufficiently capitalized to deal with those, but capital depletion would increase quickly if more severe floods were to hit the densely populated western parts of the Netherlands, and potential losses were estimated between 10 billion to 25 billion, depending on the severity of the flood. So there were some very important implications for financial stability there. And so this is so as soon as obviously you probably know this, but of course when water risk becomes a risk of financial stability, it then becomes an important consideration for central banks. And the NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial System, has already been speaking about this. First of all for climate, and now with more research on nature. But it's really interesting to see an actual case study from a country where there are findings which support this. And so at the OECD, we also work with central banks. There are teams that work, for example, with the Hungarian Central Bank on developing a supervisory framework for understanding nature-related risks, which also includes water. So maybe to end, a few positive points. We work quite closely with CDP on topics relating to water, particularly with the Netherlands, the government of the Netherlands, under the Valuing Water Initiative. And so they're doing brilliant work on disclosure, which is crucial for better understanding water-related risks. And they have some very interesting data from their questionnaires. So they identified in 2020 301 billion at risk from the corporates surveyed. But what's interesting is that it only took, according to the surveys, only 55 billion would be needed to actually respond to these risks. And this is particularly interesting for manufacturing, where you can see that the cost of response is only a small fraction of the cost of, or the maximum potential financial impact of water risk. One more. One more click. Thank you. And then the 2021 data set shows some quite important news as well around stranded assets, that 13.5 billion in assets were already being stranded, with 2 billion at that time already at risk. And this, I think we talked in particular about cases in the mining industry, which are very exposed to water risk. But then a last positive note is some of the more recent data, which identified 436 billion amongst corporates surveyed in opportunities which have yet to be explored. So these are linked to improved efficiency in operations, new water-related markets, etc., and services, etc. So the main message here is that there are quite important losses which are already being foreseen by corporates, but actually there are also enormous opportunities which are not yet being explored. So there are important opportunities to mitigate risk at lower costs and the potential impacts, but there are also new markets which could be looked at. So to end here, I just wanted to show this figure, which is from the WWF Risk Filter Suite, and it's a tool which corporates can use to identify where some of the basin risks are located, and it has filters for different types of risk. And it's really a starting point. It's just a starting point for corporates to get a better understanding of the risks they're exposed to. But risk is really it's really critical for policymaking across different across the economic, social, and environmental areas. But it's also critical to investment. As I mentioned earlier, infrastructure is being built, which for the next decades. Is that? Okay. So for the. Okay. Should I keep going or?
Just Mathieu is going to look. Or is it this one? Okay, so it stopped.
It stopped. Okay.
It stopped.
Okay.
Okay, it's fine. Okay.
Okay. So maybe just to wrap up, is say without a fire. Just to wrap up, I wanted to say that this is quite a broad view, and I understand I've given you quite a broad view of water risk, but I think it's important to start off with this sort of broader understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about water risk, and then refine this to what can actually be done practically, notably in the context of this task force. But we're really quite interested, and as I've mentioned, being excited as well about the work that you'll be doing or the task force will be doing on water risk, because understanding of risk really underpins action across policy, across investments, and it's really critical for what we see as a need for systemic change to increase resilience to water risk. So yeah, we're very happy to be supporting where we can on this process, not just myself, but also expertise from within the directorate. And so thank you for your time, and if of interest, this is the working paper that we published just this year, which does an initial mapping of different financial actors and exposure to water-related risk, and also highlights a lack of understanding or a lack of awareness of these risks to a large extent, and risk management practices which are not yet adequate to measure them. So yep, I'll stop there, but thank you for your time and your patience.
So you willing to entertain a few questions?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if any of you would like to ask a question to Laila, or well, it's a brave, or that it's very very clear.
Okay, there's a question that came in online, so I'll read it here.
There's some virtual attendees.
Yeah, so were the RWA spikes tied to LGD downgrades, or a blend of PD and EAD as well?
There may be unknown water risk.
I think I need a few more words in that question to be able to answer. My apologies, but I can take that away and answer it offline after studying the acronyms. But thank you for the question.
Okay, so that's yes, we have a question at the front.
So, wow. Technology is not working for me either. Okay, thank you. So Layla, thanks so much for coming in on a Saturday. Really appreciate that as well, and it was very informative. So as with all these climate change things, it's always a little bit scary and daunting and stuff. So what's the takeaway from here as individuals? So you've told us what we can do as actuaries, but as individuals, what can we all be doing better with respect to improving the water quality and safety? Thank you.
Should we do one question at a time, or
I would say one person at a time.
okay? Yeah. I think that's a really interesting question, and so I think it's a very important question as well, because I think at the moment we don't really understand the water that goes into the products we consume. We don't really value water appropriately, and there's there's obviously actions that you can take as an individual in terms of our own water consumption, but I think there's also an important role for better valuation of water resources amongst corporates and better tracking of water impacts and dependencies amongst financial institutions as well. So maybe I'm taking away from just you as an individual, because there is a lot we can do as an individual in terms of like managing our water consumption, looking at the water footprint of the products we consume, and I think that's very, very important. But I think what's also really important is increasing disclosure on how water is being used by corporates and for financial institutions to understand the water footprint of the product or the companies that they're financing. And so the work that's upcoming under the Task Force on Nature related to financial disclosure, which includes water, and also the work under the CDP on its water security questionnaire are really, really critical to have more information on how water is being used and how we're impacting on it and how we're depending on it.
Test technology again. Oh, it works. Okay. So next, Thomas, you have a question?
Yes, please. So thank you also for coming here. My question is about perspective. So what is you're looking at some perspective about this risk, how it will evolve in the future, and on one side or on the other side, what are the investments that are needed to limit the risk in the future?
So I think there are a lot there. So water is quite it's such a huge, it's not a sector as such, it's such a huge topic which crosses so many sectors. So when we talk about water related investments, we're of course talking about water supply and sanitation, which is a very critical issue, but we're also talking about a whole range of other investments across different areas which can improve how we use water. So I'm thinking notably of how industry treats water, how it treats water before it releases it, or how it improves its efficiency of water use. So I think there's a lot of investments. There's adaptation as well, which is a huge area in itself, making sure we're increasing our resilience to water-related infrastructure. And I think there's a really important point on actually just mainstreaming water across investments, or mainstreaming understanding of water-related risks across sectors, again, which requires data and better risk management tools or risk assessment tools, which can help us do that. So I don't have one single answer there, but I think the main point is that we really need to be mainstreaming the way we look at water across all sectors and not just focusing on one in particular. Did I answer the whole question? I didn't quite catch it. Okay. Yeah.
There's another question that came online, so Christian just put it up on the screen for you.
So there's actually, so CDP has a report which actually drills down into those numbers. So these are sort of the headline figures from the 2020 CDP questionnaire. So I wouldn't answer those questions all myself, but I think what they were trying to highlight is what corporates have already reported as being value at risk, and what they're in their individual survey responses, and also what they've seen as the potential costs of addressing those risks. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Thank you. So you will hear more about water risk in the future. So looking forward for that. And our next speaker, the time for you, Jill, to talk about, well, with all these risks, where as actuaries we could what we can do and how we can help ourselves.
Layla, if you want, you could sit down there so you can see.
I'll
Plus,
do
I
that.
don't want you so close to me. She's so pretty. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, so this will be my symbol for time to turn the slide. So thank you very much, everyone, for having me here today. So I wanted to just basically give you an overview of the report that was released earlier in the year about, as the first working paper from the Future Actuary Task Force. We split the task force basically into three big tasks. So the first was looking at a risk and what are the risks and opportunities to the actuarial profession. Then the next task, so think of it as a circle, a cycle, perhaps a cycle, like an actuarial cycle. No, go back. Didn't do the sign. Is to look at what's the skill gap and how do we fill that? So we've asked the Education Committee to look into that, and they're putting together a statement of intent on that. And then the current work that's ongoing is about building supply and demand. So what today's presentation is going to be about is our first report. So with that, great. So who is the future actuary? So there's lots of different ideas of what the future is going to look like. How are we going to be impacted by artificial intelligence? What about climate change, aging population, pandemics, I think we're all very familiar with, as well as other things like the rise of Bitcoin, the rise of robotics. How is all of that going to impact our work? So we looked at what also are the skills that we're going to need and what domains we might move into the future. Very nice. So we looked at it sort of as a roadmap, and I'd like to give full credit for Amali for all of the awesome graphics. My graphics were super embarrassing. But when you think about actuaries, what are the words that really come to mind is things like analytical. So we're actually right now as the first step with the supply and demand task forces, we're doing a scan of what are on the various different FMA's websites about how they're describing who is an actuary and who is their target audience when they're describing it as well. But when we looked inside ourselves, we said, okay, it's analytical, it's mathematics, we need to have communication. Okay, sure, thanks. What are things that make us special is we've got our professional code of conduct, the ethics. But looking forward as well is if we want to really continue to remain relevant and if we want to be in those leading positions, we probably can do a bit more work on being strategically focused, our leadership skills, emotional intelligence. Obviously, all of you in this room possess those skills, but I'm thinking for the generation coming up, we need to make sure that we're putting some emphasis on that as well. And then when we think about the domain knowledge, obviously insurance and pensions is the first things that we think of. Expanding into the government, but then as well as like banking, we see in some areas, data science, climate risk, water, ESG, artificial intelligence. So these are things too that are coming down the pipe. Now, not every actuary is going to do all of these things. We're all going to be in different specialties, but these are some new specialties that we think are opening up. So when we think about the landscape of tomorrow and what the domain opportunities are, we did try to do a bit of a split between sort of more mature economies and the fast-growing economies. We also tried to do this with respect to the skills, but we said the skills are universal. An actuary is an actuary no matter where they work. But there are different opportunities in the domains. Now, some are common, like risk management, banking, ESG, climate risk, the traditional fields. But the mature economies might have a bit more in artificial intelligence or working differently in the public sector, whereas the fast-growing economies, maybe their pension plans are just currently being developed, as well as getting some of the actuarial roles codified into the regulations. I heard talk yesterday that some economies and governments, they have to go and actually pitch, this is what an actuary is, and this is why you should talk to us. So there certainly is a varying level with respect to domains. But these are all just mine and the task force thoughts. I would like to know some of your thoughts. So you get to pull out your phones if you weren't already playing with them already. Okay, and so we've got two polls. So you can scan the QR code here, or you can go to slido.com and type in this number. And what I want to know is, what is the key skill that you want to develop
or that you think, oh, I feel like I'm taking my photo, or what is the one that you think actuaries are going to need in the future? So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes, and the answers are going to pop up on screen. So Layla's going to say, you guys need to learn more about water. You don't have to do it, Layla, that's fine. So hopefully the answers will start. There we go. Cooperation. Okay, that sort of implies we don't cooperate now, but okay, fair point. AI, coding, communication, agility, sustainable risk management, communication, climate risk, data science. We've got domain coming in our next one, critical thinking. Oh, good, it's starting to like summarize some of these as well. So sound use of AI, I like that. Advocacy, pickleball, okay. So that's, you know, I guess like we can do that as well. Strategic thinking, politics, interesting. So let's just, EQ and CQ. I don't know what CQ is. So whoever typed that, you have to tell me what it is. Is that communication quotient? CQ. See, look, so I need to learn that. Creative problem solving, ChatGPT, looking outside the box, learn more about the adjacencies. So 100% agree with that. Data science, ability to simplify increasingly complex emergent technologies. New ideas, are these old? Okay, I don't know what that means. Persuasion, health, economic concepts, open view, challenging the popular paradigms. So these are all fantastic. And I think cultural intelligence. Okay, so we all know what I'm lacking right now. So, but these are all great answers. NatCat modeling, yeah, for sure. You can make sure you put your floods in there properly as well. So visibility, okay. So what I want to do is I've got one more question that I want to ask you all as well, is what do you think is going to be the biggest domain growth area for actuaries in the future? So hopefully some of you will put water, but not everybody, please. So we'll put that as our default. Yes, we're going to say that. But what do we see as the biggest domain? So we got the AI, climate, healthcare, climate risk modeling, just water, data science, data analytics, health, big data, climate science. No more pensions. No, that's true. I don't have one. I don't know about the rest of you. Food security, lots of AI, waistline. That must be the pickleball player as well. I know they're not talking about me. Sustainability, yeah, for sure. That AI/DS, that could be read differently if you read that too quickly. Yeah, predictive and the ethics of AI. And so the ethics of AI is an interesting one as well, because I think that's something that being actuaries and being from a profession with our professional codes of conduct, this is something that we would be able to add value to. Intelligence. So I don't know if they mean the intelligence community or just ourselves need to be more intelligent. Okay, so this is great. And this is super helpful. And I think, honestly, I've asked Christian as well to sort of record this for us as well, these answers, because I think this also helps give us, the IAA, as well as us as the FMA, some direction of areas of what we should be working on as well and providing support to our future actuaries. So I'm short and sweet. I've got the QR code is here for the report. It's a little bit tricky sometimes to find on the website. I will talk to Christian about that though. But you can see the report there. It was really very interesting conversations that we had with the task force. And I think there is a lot more interesting work to do. And I think it's really great that the profession is continuing to challenge itself and not just resting on the laurels of who we are, but really preparing for the future coming up. So with that, I don't know if you want to do questions now or later, Michelin. What works for you? Sure. Yeah. And I also, if this is of interest to you as an FMA, I'm happy to do a webinar or something with you. And I've got a longer presentation. This is a short and sweet one, but I'm happy to do that as well. You can just reach out to me afterwards. So I don't know if there's any questions. Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Jill, for the presentation and for your sense of humor. Much appreciated. Lisa, if you want to join us, we have a very important topic like diversity and inclusion, and so we'll let you guide us through that process.
Thank you very much, Micheline. I don't know. I don't know what excitement I can bring to you today. I mean, Jill had a dance. Lila had fire alarms. And I'm here talking to you about diversity and inclusion. I don't know what's going to happen. Anything can play, but we'll see what's working now. Okay. Oh, it works. That's the excitement I brought. The clicker works. So the actuarial profession, by its nature, is a small profession. And we do have to admit that we do have a pretty challenging and rigorous qualification process. You know, by nature, we're trusted professionals. It'd be expected that we would want to be top of our game. So we do have that rigorous process. But what happens very often, by virtue of this particular process we have with respect to qualification, is the actuarial profession doesn't look like the populations from which it comes. So there is that juxtaposition by virtue of who we are, the role we play within our societies. Very often, the wide, diverse nature of our populations don't have access to the educational process, may not even have heard of the particular profession. In many countries, young people who are good at mathematics don't hear about the actuarial program until they finish university, or sometimes very late in high school after they've actually made the choice in terms of the career that they want to pursue. So we don't really look as diverse as our populations. So that's not a problem that we here can solve. What we can hopefully do is have conversations about it, which can then hopefully inspire our FMAs to start working more within the communities to start improving the diversity of the actuarial pipeline. So that's the contribution that we can make in that particular way. So what we here can do in terms of being members of the IAA, volunteers within the IAA, and in very many cases, leaders within the IAA, is to focus on the areas of diversity of thought, as well as inclusion, which are two very, very important things, so that we can ensure that when we do have more volunteers and more diverse volunteers, they feel as if they can contribute at the level at which they would want to contribute within the IAA. Now, it seems kind of interesting because the IAA, by nature of being an association of associations, is global in nature. So there is some level of inherent diversity within the IAA. We all come from very, very different countries, all have very different personal backgrounds, and have lots of differences across our different cultures. What we at the IAA have been doing, we've been working to improve diversity and inclusion. And we've been working to do that through our engagements with our volunteers, our member associations, as well as our stakeholders. Some of the key initiatives that we have done at an EC level in terms of influencing diversity and inclusion has been the change in our value statement. We actually put in specific wording to indicate that this is something that is a key objective for us. And we have also started up our diversity and inclusion task force, many of the members which are here today. I won't embarrass you by asking you to stand and acknowledge yourselves. So in terms of what we've been doing, I think very often in terms of diversity and inclusion, we have to look at it in terms of the role that the organization plays, as well as the role that we as individuals play within that particular organization. And we really think that as leaders within the IAA, it's really important that within the service that you provide to the IAA, you recognize the different life experiences that volunteers may have, and to really try to harness the experience of diverse teams, because it has been shown that diverse teams do produce better results. Just by having diversity of thought, someone who comes from a very different background can make you look at an issue in an entirely different way, and the overall result could be one that you can all benefit from. Okay, Christian, you have to help me out here. Okay, thanks very much. So what we've done is we've tried to actually come up with some numbers. You know, we're actuaries, we like numbers and hard facts. So we reviewed some reports of the nominations committees through the years. We took 2 points, 2015 and 2023, just to provide a snapshot of how diversity has evolved in the IAA during that particular period of time. The metrics are slightly different because the reporting of the nominations committee has changed slightly over that particular period of time. You see, I'm being very scientific and clinical about how I'm breaking this down, okay? So the 2015 information reports on candidates that were recommended by the NC, whereas the 2024 information, which was provided in the Sydney meeting, speaks more to the persons who were nominated by the FMAs for different positions. I have been accurate in what I've been reporting, right, Jan? Okay, good. So we've looked at 3 of the most common measures of diversity that we focus on, or that the NC has focused on over the years. The first one is gender. So you can see from this particular slide that there has been a significant increase in terms of female participation at the IAA. And this is also partially evidenced by the fact that we've had 3 female presidents in a pretty short time. We had Tanya, we had Roseanne, we had Micheline, so we are going about to have Rosanna. So we've had some really, we've had a really good run, ladies, in the most recent years. So for female participation has increased significantly within the IAA over this particular period of time. Christian? The other one that we've looked at has been in terms of non-native English speakers and native English speakers. Just trying to get an idea in terms of cultural makeup and differences there. And you can see the chart is kind of flipped. You know, we now have more non-native English speakers as opposed to native English speakers as well. Yes, the language that we speak at the IAA is still English, but we have had this particular improvement in terms of the cultural makeup of the persons who are working at the IAA as well as the persons who are coming forward for candidature. And something along those same lines as well is the regional diversity in terms of the particular candidates coming from the 3 main regions that are tracked by the IAA, being ALOA, which is basically everyone all the countries outside of US, Canada, and Europe. And that too has had quite a change in terms of what has happened over the last couple of years as well. So I do think it's great that we can see that the persons coming to the IAA are a lot more diverse than they were before. I think we are starting to reflect a bit more the global nature of the profession. We're also starting to have some more views coming from developing countries as well, as you're getting more volunteers from those countries within the IAA. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, it's really important, as I said, for us to look at the issue of inclusion and look at the issue of how we can foster a culture of belonging within the IAA. As a volunteer organization, which is very diverse in terms of the backgrounds of its volunteers, it is really important that we can ensure that the volunteers from these diverse organizations can feel really supported. It's really important that persons who are within leadership positions within the IAA can become their allies so that these persons feel that they can continue to contribute to the IAA and hopefully within time can also move on into leadership positions as well. You know, we all have a role to play, and it's really important, especially when you have the situations where you have persons that come from smaller FMAs. Coming to the IAA is a very interesting experience, especially if you don't have someone from your smaller FMA to help, you know, guide you through that. And if you really want to benefit from that person's viewpoint and their technical expertise, if they've been put forward, they're very well regarded within their FMA. It is a case whereby you have to kind of help champion them along and encourage them in order to have that level of participation. Okay, so I have some work for you to do like Jill. It's not so hard. It's just some yes, no questions. But we thought it would be a really good opportunity to get some feedback from you in terms of some of the training that we're considering within the diversity and inclusion group. So we just have some questions that we thought it would be useful because it would give us a baseline in terms of where the training should start. So the first question is, have you actually attended D&I training in the last 2 years? D&I and DEI have also been some very topical issues within workplaces, and many persons within senior positions within companies have been undergoing such training. So we just thought that, before we start to conceptualize what we're looking at with respect to training or diversity and inclusion offerings amongst volunteers and leaders, it would be useful to know what you've done. Okay, so the numbers have stopped moving. Well, this is really good news. So we've got, the vast majority of people have undergone some level of training in terms of D&I within the last 2 years. So that is really useful information. So the next one is that we want to know if you believe that D&I training should be mandatory for IAA leaders. This could be controversial or not controversial, but we do want to understand, how receptive persons who are within leadership positions within the IAA are to further D&I training. And if it's a case whereby, should it be mandatory? Is this something that you need to fulfill in order to take up a particular position within the IAA? Or do you feel that because it's a volunteer organization, that you should be able to come to it and hopefully perform at your best and assume that will be good enough? Okay, so the numbers have stopped moving. Oh, not quite yet. Couple leader ones. Okay, so 50% of people think that IAA leaders should have some level of diversity and inclusion training. I will be honest, we've kind of had some initial discussions in committee, and we were thinking that it probably would be compared to what you've done at work, D&I Light. It probably would be like about 1 or 2 one-hour sessions, just in the first instance, but we have been talking about the fact that we do think it is important to have some level of training within leadership positions within the IAA, but we haven't yet fully fleshed out what that could look like. And Roseanne's nodding at me, which means I'm saying the right thing. Christian, can you help me out? Okay, so would you be willing now to attend this training? It's one thing us saying that we would like you to do it and we want you to do it, but will you turn up? Okay, so we have just over half say yes, they'll come. About a quarter say they're not coming. And then we've got some maybes. So we hopefully, if we do have some level of training, we should at least get 75% of persons attending. We do understand that the topic of diversity and inclusion is one which is not an easy one. But we do believe that it is an important one for the organization. We are diverse, and by coming from different cultural points, it is important that we try to find ways in which we can understand each other. I mean, I'm West Indian, and you will notice that the other presenters, generally would not have used their hands as much. And in some cultures, that could be perceived as aggressive. But I'm West Indian, I talk with my hands. So I'm saying almost as much with my hands as I'm saying with my mouth. And I'm not meaning anything by it, but that's just how we are. And for some cultures, they may not fully understand it. I also appreciate that we have a lot of non-native English speakers here. And I try to slow myself down sometimes because I generally speak quickly. And it's important that we just kind of understand these things about each other so that everybody can participate. Because my communication style might not mesh with your communication style. And you may not be as receptive to my communication style because of the cultural differences, when really and truly, I'm not meaning anything and there's nothing to be implied from it, but it's just a difference. So what is the current work that we're doing? So we're actuaries, we like numbers, we like surveys. So we'd carried out our first survey in 2021, just to get it's kind of like a pulse survey. Well, not as short as a pulse survey, but we wanted some initial information in terms of what work was being done on D&I within the IAA, as well as what areas within D&I the FMAs would like us to focus on. So coming out of that particular study, we got some really good information in terms of the initiatives that were being undertaken by a lot of FMAs in the area of D&I. And that information is on our D&I landing page. So you can definitely go there and get lots of good information in terms of the progress which is being made, the charts that are being done, the feedback mechanisms in terms of D&I for many of the FMAs that have really advanced within that journey. And we found that what was really useful was those FMAs which wanted to start the D&I journey, they didn't have the resources that certain other FMAs had. The IFOA had done extensive work on it. CAS had done extensive work in the SOA, and some of them were able to read that material, review that material, and leverage it in terms of trying to help them determine where they wanted to go with D&I. So we're going to conduct another survey within the next couple of weeks, and what we're going to try to get from them is what progress FMAs have made along that D&I journey and what work they want the IAA to do. One interesting thing that came out of the first survey was the main area they wanted us to focus on were the areas of age, which is a lot of that great work that Jill is doing in terms of the Future Actuary Task Force, focusing on younger persons, trying to encourage them within the actuarial profession, as well as gender, looking to see how we could promote women more within the particular profession as well too. We're going to try to do a technical webinar looking at gender and pricing, especially within the European market. That would be pretty interesting. We're looking at the training sessions for IAA leaders, and we're also going to have a diversity workshop in Seoul to build really on that very good webinar that we had earlier this year that Tanya Manning hosted. That was very well received, and the FMAs have indicated that they would like us to move further. So we're going to have a workshop on diversity in Seoul. So I'm going to wrap up now. What we really think is what the IAA brings to the issue of diversity within the actuarial profession is that we're a unique global meeting place. By the fact that so many of the different associations are here, it's a place where we can have discussions with each other and really learn from each other. So we've been really focusing a lot in terms of having seminars, doing polls, and sharing that kind of information. It's really important, we think, that within the leadership, we also have that diversity as well too, that we have within the actuarial profession. But we do recognize that to some extent, there has got to be some kind of intent to get diversity. And it's been really good that the IAA has consistently over a good period of time been measuring diversity markers so that, we kind of report on it when the NC, the nominations committee, does its meeting, and we're holding up that mirror to ourselves to show where we are on this particular journey. There are lots of ways in which diversity also impacts the work that we do. And it's important that we do consider this in terms of things that we do in terms of designing products and pricing. But in general, I would like to say to you all, for me, you look at me, I'm a woman of color, but I would say to you, I never thought as much about diversity and inclusion as I did, until I became part of this task force. And it's really important that we try to mentor and coach and encourage people to consider the impact that diversity and inclusion really has in the way in which they go about their work, as the way in which they operate within volunteer organizations as well. Because those types of personal connections and interactions, there is an impact, and persons who come from what would be considered smaller groups, it really makes a difference for them to feel included. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we're going to follow your progress on diversity. Yes. So passing on to the celebration part. We were going to hear Chris, if you want to join us here. Is it, do you need help? No, so Chris is been a witness of the creation of the IAA as an association of association You may have to handle the technology. You see already that there are some issues with technology.
You
So
want me to start, or is Eve coming on?
you start, please.
Okay.
And then we'll have a pause to making sure that it links with Eve. In that time period, you may have cupcakes. So
Okay. So yes, it's 25 years since the IAA in its present form was established at the Birmingham Congress in 1998. But I'm sure that most of you know that the IAA started a long time before that, back in 1895, at the Brussels Congress. None of us were alive then, but that was when the IAA got started. And then for many years, really for pretty well a century, what the IAA did was to organize congresses every few years. They also, in the latter part of that period, did a few other things. They established ASTIN in 1957. They established AFIR as another section in about 1990. And they set up the International Promotion and Education Fund, which became the IAA Fund. That was about 1992, to support the development of the profession in new areas. But it was a fairly, if you like, steady organization, not much going on. It was an association essentially of members, individuals who wanted to go to congresses. It had always its council meetings in Brussels. It had the president and the secretary general were always Belgians. So when I came on the scene in 1992 and started attending council meetings, we had Willy Lennertz was the secretary general. We had André de la Mens, who was the president, and we met in Brussels, and we had a meeting of about an hour, and then we had a lovely dinner at the Swan restaurant in Brussels, which was very pleasant, I must say, and got to know a few other senior actuaries from around the world. But in 1992, at the Montreal Congress, a few actuaries got together, leaders of the profession, mostly to start with from the English-speaking countries, led by Paul McCrossan from Canada, and established what was initially called the McCrossan Group, to discuss how we could transition the IAA to become a professional organization to support the development of professional bodies around the world, rather than just the scientific work of individual actuaries. And in 1995, the IAA agreed to establish a section, which was called the IFAA, the International Forum of Actuarial Associations, which was to be an association of associations. They weren't ready at that stage to make the IAA do that, but we got involved in the IFAA. Paul McCrossan was the first president. I was the second one. Walt Rugland was the third. We had council meetings. We had about 37 associations were members. We started to introduce education requirements, professionalism requirements, most of the structure which later became the foundation of the IAA. And alongside that, a committee was set up by the old IAA under Hans Buhlmann from Switzerland to discuss whether the IAA wanted to go along with this or just keep it as a section, a subset of what was going on. But by 1998, by the Birmingham Congress, the IAA had decided to espouse this new concept and to convert the IAA into an association of associations. So we then had a sort of reverse takeover, that all of the structure of the IFAA became the structure of the IAA from 1998 onwards. And that was the beginning of the transition, which, of course, now you're seeing the fruits of that 25 years on. At that beginning, we only had probably about 8 or 9 committees, and then it sort of grew like Topsy until we had hundreds of committees. And then a couple of years back, we started to sort of pare it back and have rather fewer committees. But the first president of the IAA in its new form was Jean Berton. Many of you will know him from France. because the French were very sensitive about this change from the old IAA to the new IAA. And in fact, even the IFAA was originally going to be the International Federation of Actuarial Associations, but in discussions over coffee in the Brussels Congress, we agreed between the French and the other people who were involved in this that we would call it a forum rather than a federation. And that was a sort of nuance in terms of how it was going to be presented to the world. Initially, we had 3 council meetings a year. Then it transitioned to 2 more recently. And of course, since then, the IA has gone on from strength to strength. And I think there's now about 73 full member associations and sort of covering the whole globe. And I believe Eve is going to show a couple of slides which show that growth over the last 25 years. So now the actuarial profession genuinely is doing what we intended it to do from 1992, 1995, 1988 onwards, to be globally recognized as the leading experts in risk and financial security and contributing to the well-being of society. And even more than we did at the beginning, we now have a challenge of that sort of diversity within associations, the huge ones who already have global coverage in effect through their membership, and the very small ones who are all aspiring to be professional bodies but don't have the resources but want to participate. So that's something which the IA will continue to have as its challenge going forward. So I recall all those wonderful events from a long time ago. Not many of you were around then, I think, but sometimes we have a few people who were there in 1998. And occasionally Paul McCrossan turns up to these meetings, but not very often. And of course, we recall with gratitude those people who did all the work to get things started back in those early days. Thank you.
Cupcakes. So what's the organization here? You pass it along. No, Eve first. No. So sorry. Are you going to explain to us? Yes, the tray of the cupcakes. You have to imagine the fireworks. Oh yes. Yes. You probably need one. So, happy birthday, IA. And Eve, yes. Okay, so.
We'll pass the cupcakes while Eve is speaking.
Okay, that sounds good.
We can do a cupcake cheers.
And don't forget.
Try not to put the cupcake on the person in front of you.
So Christian, you tell me when Eve is joining us.
I am there.
So.
Hello.
Eve? Eve, welcome. You need sound. Right now, we don't have sound, it seems.
Well, my sound
Wait
is
a second,
on.
Eve. Well,
So-
we don't. I guess he's not hearing us.
Yeah. The sound should be on from my end.
Yes.
Well, do you hear me now?
Oui. Orange. On va y aller avec. OK. OK. So Yves, we Yves and Christian.
Do you hear me?
Yves Garand has been our Secretary General. Sorry, I was back in those days, and is still quite, as is Chris, fairly active members of the IA, which is something to quite. I'm hoping that I'll be able to do something like that, but I don't know that people would want that. But that's okay. Yves, I'll let you now have the mic.
Good afternoon to all of you. I will not repeat what Chris has already explained, that reform was a 7-year process. It was clear that voluntary membership could not achieve the more ambitious objectives that were developed by consensus over 7 years of consultation. To make the profession globally inclusive, create an interconnected network with a stronger growth potential required shifting to an association of associations. At first, actuaries remained IAA member, but legal concern led to eliminate individual membership, but scientific sections remain open to individual actuaries. A common objective was to develop the profession intellectual assets, build common critical mass of actuarial knowledge and tools, take advantage of technical development, and meet growing needs for actuarial science. Educational requirements and international standards of actuarial practice would ensure quality of actuarial services around the world and control reputational risk. The profession needed to be recognized as a major player at the management of risk, contributing to the well-being of society as a whole as per our vision. Also, to be a voice to dialogue with governments, emerging supranational entities, and other professions. The concept of thinking globally but acting locally was important, as was the respect of local autonomy, which was protected by the adoption of the principle of subsidiarity. Next slide, please. This map shows many actuarial deserts and a small number of actuaries. My estimate of less than 32,000 actuaries is an approximation after adjusting for double counting. The map for 2008 and the decennial report confirmed the success of the reform after 10 years. I was elected the Secretary General in 1998 after being persuaded by Paul McCrossan to accept that risk. I thank him for offering me what proved to be a gratifying challenge. I attribute most of the success to the support of Nicole Seguin and the team of the Secretariat, with thanks to Hans Bullman and many other actuaries that shared the dream of a more vibrant actuarial profession. Let's jump to 2023. Actuaries are present around the world, but less in Africa. Our growth rate exceeded the real GDP of about 3.1%, so we deepened our penetration. However, we have only 19 associations with 1,000 actuaries or more. I counted 25 with less than 100. Mutual support will remain essential even as we pass over the 100,000 mark. Next slide, please. We can all be proud that the IAA achieved most of the objectives of the 1998 reform, greater recognition of the profession, and maintain high credibility. But I think we could expand more beyond traditional areas as risks are growing in complexity. Deepen risk management beyond risk measurement, and do better in enterprise risk management. When my mandate ended in 2010, I solicited as a parting gift the mandate to launch an environment working group. I saw climate risk as a new frontier for actuaries, and in 2017, I expected we would be busy helping with TCFD disclosure reports. I was wrong. We were slow rising to the challenge, but I am pleased now to see accelerated progress and a flow of publications from the CRTF. We added climate risk, but soon we will need to add AI, artificial intelligence. I'd like to persuade you that truth is also at risk. Given our unique credentials and high credibility, we have a professional responsibility to help truth survive in the public domain in all areas where actuaries can contribute. The IAA May 2023 adaptation gap paper should be more widely promoted. The same for the November 15 news release on climate risk management ahead of COP28. The key challenges are external. We should focus on them rather than internal issues. Greatly increase outreach and expand communications, rather than be the silent guardians of the valuable expertise nearly 100,000 soon-to-be actuaries could offer to improve the well-being of 8 million people. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yves. Thank you especially for your vision that you had, and that I'm glad that you were there to guide us over the years. Thank you very much for attending this town hall meeting, and I think we're expected in 10 minutes in the next timing. To give you on the spot.
Cupcakes now.